We'll be starting in a few seconds. Hello to everybody. This is Joey Faur teaching here. Today we will be starting Hilchot Eruvin, which is really an extension of Hilchot Shabbat. Before starting, I'll give a little introduction with some key points to know and understand in order to properly understand Hilchot Eruvin. So first of all, Eruv comes from the Hebrew root Ayin Resh Bet. The initial, most literal meaning of this word is from the term Erbub, which means mixing two or more things together. And from here comes the term for evening, Erev, which means evening or night. And this is because the evening is the time in which darkness settles in and people won't be able to tell the difference between different objects due to the darkness. And this is the same time as well that splits between the night and the day. So Erev also means Orev, a blackbird, which is black, like the Erev. So just a little bit more about Eruvin. So there are certain domains which are private ones, but in order to carry in them, they need to have an Eruv done to them. In the coming halachot, we will discuss how to make an Eruv, in Haserot and Mevoim, which I will explain what they are in a second. And this is all in talking about places which were already set up in order to have an Eruv in them. This setting up was discussed in depth in chapter 17 of Hilchot Shabbat, and I highly recommend studying that chapter and the one before it, chapter 16 and 17, before coming to Hilchot Eruvin. Although I'll explain some of the basic laws regarding Hechsherei Mevo'ot, the setting up of the Haserot and the Mevo'ot right now. I still nevertheless highly recommend going over those chapters before coming to Hilchot Eruvin. So I must define some key definitions here, as really just because the following chapters are all based on definitions that were previously defined, and it is key to understand these definitions that I'm going to explain right now in order to understand Hilchot Eruvin. So the first thing to explain is a haser, literally translated as a courtyard, the term haser, and it refers to any jointly owned private domain yard that may be in the middle of houses or something like that. So this jointly owned piece of land is usually surrounded by privately owned sections like houses, apartments, etc. These haserot were usually connected to the outside via an alleyway called a maboy. The haser has to be squared in order to be considered a haser. However, if the haser is rectangular, then it is considered to be like a maboy and has the rules of a maboy, which will be specified later. So again, a haser is some sort of courtyard or any private domain that is squared and has houses around it, which are all, and this whole area of the haser is called a private domain. In it, there are sections which have private ownership by the different residents of the haser. But this whole place, from scriptural law, should be allowed to be carried in. Yet Chachamim said that it needs to have an eruv in order to be carried in. The second thing I must explain is a bayit. So a bayit is literally translated as house, and we'll usually refer here to the privatemost area within a haser, which is already considered a private domain. It should be noted, again, as I said, that's from scriptural law, the haser is considered to be 100% private domain. However, for reasons that we will see in our chapter, the sages made a decree forbidding anyone to carry from his own section within the haser and into the haser in order, and we'll see a little bit later. A maboy, third term that has to be clarified, is an alleyway or hallway, and it refers to some kind of pathway that leads up to the haser or any other private domain. It was described, as I said previously, in the middle chapters of Hilchot Shabbat, chapter 16 and 17. And in those chapters are brought two types of mevoim. The first type is a maboy mefulash, an alleyway that is open to the public domain from both sides. Okay, so you have two parallel walls. Okay, it's like a whole alleyway with two parallel walls, and two openings from both sides. This is what we call a mavoy mefulash. A mavoy satum is an alleyway that is open to the public domain from only one side. In other words, it's an alleyway that consists of 3 walls that have one singular exit leading to the public domain. It could be thought of as an alleyway. In modern terms, we would say a dead-end alleyway, an alleyway leading up to a dead end. Now, another thing we must talk about is hechsher of mevo'ot and haserot. In order to be able to make an eruv on a mavoy or a haser, there's a process of setting up that needs to be done called hechsher mavoy or hechsher haser. This is achieved by adding a lehi or korah to the entrances of the mavoy, leading out to the public domain. So the mavoy is the alleyway. So the way to set it up in order to be able to take an eruv is by adding a lehi or korah. A lehi is a beam from the side of the entrance, which acts as a kind of protrusion in the entrance, giving it the status of some kind of wall. A korah is a beam of sorts that is laid from on top of the entrance to the mavoy, acting as heker, some sort of reminder that this alleyway is not a Reshut Rabbim, but rather a special status alleyway. The difference between these two, a lehi and a korah, is that a lehi is considered like a fourth wall, making the alleyway with the lehi to be considered a full-fledged private domain, thus holding someone that brings something in it from Reshut Rabbim or vice versa liable if he brings something in it. However, an alleyway that was put a korah, even though carrying it is permitted by doing shituf mevo'ot, as will be explained momentarily, it's not allowed, it's not considered a full-fledged private domain, and therefore anyone who took something from the private, from the public domain or vice versa, is not going to be held liable by scriptural law. So these are key points, which without understanding, without we won't understand this chapter, and be very hard to understand. In order to make a haser kosher for an eruv, it needs to have either a lehi from each side, or so in order to make a mavoy kosher for an eruv, it needs to have either a lehi on each entrance or a korah on each entrance. That's sufficient. In order to make a haser kosher for an eruv, it needs to have either a lehi from each side of the entrance with a minimal width, or a lehi from one side that is 4 tefahim wide, 4 fists wide. The fourth term, which needs to be clarified, is what an eruv is. I said in the beginning, an eruv comes from the term erbuv, which means the merging or mixing of a group, mixing. An eruv in our set of halachot refers to the merging or mixing of a group of people into one by virtue of the fact that they have some kind of joint meal or food that they eat together. And more on that we'll see in this chapter. This merging is what will allow the group of people to be able to carry from their own homes into the jointly owned courtyard, haser or mabo. The last thing we will need to clarify is what shituf mevo'ot. It's the equivalent of an eruv in the context of a mavo. The rules of shituf are different in many cases than the rules of eruv, and we will see more on that in the upcoming chapters. So I recommend anybody who isn't fluent in the things I just explained briefly goes over it in their free times and listens to chapters 16, 17 of Shabbat. So now we will start Hilchot Eruvin. So Harambam writes, I don't have it written here in the Machon Memre page, but he writes, Misvat aseh achat v'hi midibre sofrim. Ve'inaha min haminyan u'be'ur misvah zo b'frakim elu. It is a positive precept to do eruv when needed. In other words, when somebody, it's a more of a decree done by the sages, and it's not from the 613 misvot. So it's a decree made by the sages. Halacha Aleph. So, Mehillah, before I start, I will talk about the division of the chapter, as I usually do, just to make things a little bit easier to keep track of. So our chapter is divided into 6 parts. It starts with explaining the point. The first part explains the point of eruv, which is a precept formulated by the sages, as I said. The next one is the definition of the word eruv. We will see that. The third part will talk about the food portions in regard to shituf mevo'ot, different volumes and sizes, which are very helpful, by the way, in other halachic topics. The fourth part of the chapter will discuss what forbidden to eat foods are permitted to use for an eruv and what are not. The fifth part discusses the description of the process of the collection of the eruv from the neighbors of the mavoy or the haser, and where and how to lay it. This is in regard to shituf as well, etc. And the sixth and final part of the chapter talks about the setting itself of the eruv, that it has to be done with the entrance of Shabbat, and therefore it needs to be in place and edible from the time of Ben HaShemashot, which is the time from sunset, until the coming out of the 3 medium stars. Okay, הלכה א', חסר שיש בה שכנים הרבה. כל אחד מהם בבית לעצמו. A חסר, okay, that has many residents in it, and each one resides in his own house within the confines of this haser. So again, I said the haser is a private domain that holds in it smaller, privately owned houses or apartments, etc. דין תורה הוא שיהיו כולם מותרים לטלטל בכל החסר ומבתים לחסר ומהחסר לבתים. From the Torah, the Oraita, it is permitted for them, it should be permitted for them, for these people, the residents of this haser, to carry in and out of their houses to the haser and to other people's houses within the confines of the haser, due to the haser being its own private domain. מפני שכל החסר רשות היחיד אחת שמותר לטלטל בכולה. וכן הדין במבוי שיש לו לחי או קורה, שיהיו כל בני המבוי מותרים לטלטל בכולו, ומחסרות למבוי וממבוי לחסרות. Also, the Torah permits any mavoy, any alleyway that has a lehi or a korah, that the people living within the confines of the alleyway would be allowed to take in and out from their haserot to the alleyway and from the alleyway to their haserot. Again, I'll remind what a lehi or korah is. A lehi is a beam from the side of the entrance which acts as a kind of protrusion to the entrance, giving it the status of some kind of wall. A korah is a beam of sorts that is laid from on top of the entrance to the mavoy, acting as some sort of heker, a reminder that this alleyway is not reshut rabim, and is rather has a special status it's a special status alleyway. The difference between them is that a lehi, being considered a fourth wall, makes an alleyway with considered like a full-fledged private domain, thus making anybody who takes in and out of it from the public domain to it liable from the oraita. However, alleyway, a mavoy, that has a korah on top of it, even though carrying in and out of it is permitted by doing shituf, it is not considered a full-fledged private domain, and therefore anyone who took in and out of it from the public domain will not be chayav de oraita. That is just as a quick reminder. Okay, shekol hamavoy reshut hayachid hu, right, as I said. וכן הדין במדינה שהיא מוקפת חומה גבוהה 10 טפחים, שיש לה דלתות ננעלות בלילה, שכולה רשות היחיד היא, זהו דין Torah. Also, a city that has a wall surrounding it in its entirety, and the wall is at least 10 tefahim high, 10 fist lengths high, and this city has doors or gates that lock at night. This city is considered a reshut hayachid, therefore allowing people to carry in the city. This is all from scriptural law. Halakha bet. Abal midivre sofri. However, the sages prohibited that אסור לשכנים לטלטל ברשות היחיד שיש בה החלוקה בדיורין עד שיערבו כל השכנים כולן מערב שבת, אחד חסר ואחד המבוי ואחד המדינה, ודבר זה תקנת שלמה ודינו. However, the sages prohibited that any of the residents of these haserot or meboot carry in and out of their own private residencies within the domain and into the haser, or vice versa, until they do eruv. And this is applicable to haser, to maboy, and to an entire city that's surrounded by a 10 tefahim wall. And this decree was made by Shlomo and his Beit Din. It's interesting. I just realized that if I'm not mistaken, in the Akdamat of the Mishne Tora, Shlomo is not regarded as somebody having a Beit Din. And here we see clearly that he did have a Beit Din. So that's just an interesting little point to note, and maybe there's more to build upon that. Halakha Gimel. וכן יושבי אוהלים או סוכות או מחנה שהקיפוהו מחיסה, אין מטלטלין מאוהל לאוהל עד שיערבו כולם. Also, those who dwell in tents or sukkot or campground that was surrounded by a partition are not allowed to carry in and out of their camp, their tents, sukkot, or camp area unless they do eruv. It's important to know that the word mahaneh many times brings up the implication of a military camp, rightfully so. However, in this case, it's not talking about a military camp, but rather a regular campsite that consists of many tents in one partitioned area. However, שיירה שהקיפוها מחיסה אין צריכים לערב אלא מוציאים מאוהל לאוהל בלא עירוב לפי שהן כולן מעורבים ואין אותן אוהלים קבועים להם. However, a caravan of 3 or more people that were traveling together who set up a camp that was surrounded by partitions, and the reason for the and the reason a caravan, so these people do not need to do an iruv, and the reason for this is that by virtue of them being jointly traveling together, they're mixed in one with another sufficiently, therefore they don't need an iruv for it. Halakha Dalit. Now, in this halakha, we're going to explain why the decree of Eruv was enacted. Why couldn't we just carry, if from scriptural law, a public, the Haser and Maboy, or a city that's surrounded by a 10 tefahim wall are considered private domain, then why, in that case, did Shlomo and his Beit Din enact such a decree, forbidding people to carry in and out of their homes if there's no Eruv? מפני מה תיקן שלמה דבר זה? כדי שלא יטעו ויאמרו, כשם שמותר להוציא מן החצרות לרחובות המדינה ושווקיה, ולהכניס מהם לחצרות. כך מותר להוציא מן המדינה לשדה, ולהכניס מן השדה למדינה. ויחשבו שהשווקים מהרחובות, הואיל והן רשות לכל, הרי הן כשדות וכמדברות. ויאמרו שהחצרות בלבד הן רשות היחיד. וידמו שאין ההוצאה מלאכה, ושמותר להוציא ולהכניס מרשות היחיד, so the reason for Shlomo HaMelech's decree is because people will think that the same way it is permitted to take out of Haserot Reshut HaYachid into the streets and marketplaces of a city which is surrounded by a wall that is at least 10 tefahim high, it is also, these people will come to think that it is also permitted to take in from the city and into the Haserot, right? The same way it is permitted to do that, it is also permitted to take in from the city and the Haserot. That way it is also permitted to take out from the city to the field, because the field is only at the level of a Carmelit, which is a domain that is prohibited to take in and out of only by the Rabbanan. And through this, therefore, also people will think that it's permitted to take from the fields, which we said are at the status of Carmelit, into the city for the same reason. And people from this will come to think that marketplaces and streets, because they are the domain of all, are like fields and Carmelites. And moreover, people will end up thinking that all of these are like deserts. And deserts we know are Reshut Rabbim. And then people will say the following: if from all of these, it's permitted to take in and out of one another, the very same way it is permitted to take in and out of the city to the desert, and from one domain to another, regardless of the domain status, public, private domain. And then through this, people will come to blatantly take in and out from the private domain to the public domain, which is a very serious transgression. Now, Harambam gave here a rather tongue-twisting, difficult to understand reason for the decree. In Ilchot Yom Tov, chapter 6, halakha 2, halakha bet, Harambam brings an easier to grasp reason for the decree of Eruv as made by Shlomo HaMelech. And there he says, in a very concise manner, that the mitzvah of Eruv was decreed as a sort of reminder, so that people do not end up taking in and out blatantly from the private domain to the public one, and vice versa. And that is, in a nutshell, why the mitzvah of Eruv was enacted. Halakha he, lefichach, and therefore, tiken, it was enacted. Shekol reshut hayachid shetechalek b'diyorin v'ye'echos kol echad ve'echad baha reshut le'asmo v'yisha'er mimena makom b'reshut kullan v'yad kullan shava bo kegon hachasel labatim shenaxshov oto hamakom sheyad kullan shava bo ki'ilu hu reshut larabbim. Therefore, it was enacted that any private domain that was divided into its own separated residencies, and each residence, within that domain, each person has his own part of the domain, which is his own, nobody else's. And there's, in the same domain, a jointly owned area, yard, a courtyard in between the area that is jointly owned by everybody, that it will be considered like a Reshut Rabbim, to disallow the people to take in and out from their own partitions of this public-private domain and into the jointly owned part, and vice versa, from the jointly owned part of the Haser and into their own residencies, unless they do in Eruv. ונחשוב כל מקום ומקום שאחז כל אחד מן השכנים וחלקו לעצמו, שהוא בלבד רשות היחיד, and it'll be considered that the little privately owned residencies within this large private domain are only themselves considered private domain, while the jointly owned part is considered like a public domain. And therefore it'll be אסור להוסיף רשות שחלק לעצמו רשות שיד כולם שווה בו, כמו שאין מוסיפים רשות היחיד לרשות הרבים, אלא ישתמש כל אחד ברשות שחלק לעצמו בלבד, עד שיערבו כולן אף על פי שהכל רשות היחיד. And therefore it'll be not allowed for people to take from their own little private residencies within this private domain and to the jointly owned part of the private domain, as though it was Reshut HaYachid and Reshut HaRabim, like a regular private domain taking out to a regular public domain, unless an Eruv is enacted, unless there is an Eruv done, and we will see more in the next halachot, what an Eruv is. So halacha vav. What is this עירוב? הוא שהתערבו במאכל אחד שמניחים אותו מערב שבת. כלומר, שכולנו מעורבים ואוכל אחד לכולנו, ואין כל אחד ממנו חולק רשות מחברו. אלא, כשם שיד כולנו שווה במקום זה שנשאר לכולנו, כך יד כולנו שווה בכל מקום שאחז כל אחד לעצמו, והרי אנו כולנו רשות אחת. This עירוב, this mixing, is that all of the residents of this large private domain mix themselves by virtue of having one type of food that they put in a set spot from Erev Shabbat, from before Shabbat, and this food signifies that they are all mixed in, and there's one food for all of them, and none of them has a different residency than his fellow neighbor, his fellow tenant, the fellow tenants of this Haser, and the same way they are all equal in this place in which the food was set, that way they are all equal in the rest of this larger private domain, in this larger Haser, and therefore through this, through this action, this extra action that is not normally done, people will understand the difference between a Haser, which is a private domain, and Reshut HaRabim, and will not end up taking in and out from Reshut HaRabim from Reshut HaYachid because of the Eruv. It psychologically conditions them to always remember that a Haser is a special status, and although they could take in and out from their houses within the Haser and to the jointly owned part of the Haser, it's not like Reshut HaRabim, it's something else. It's a different status. And that way people will be psychologically conditioned. Halacha zayin. העירוב שעושים בני החסר זה עם זה הוא הנקרא עירובי חסרות. The mixing that the tenants of a haser do one with another is what we call עירובי חסרות. ושעושים אנשי המבוי זה עם זה, או כל בני המדינה הוא הנקרא שיתוף. However, what the tenants living around a maboy, an alleyway, in other words, when you have haserot that are opened into an alleyway, when they do an عيروب, it's not called عيروب. When they put the food in the middle of the mixing, it's called shitufei mevo'ot. And also this is when they do in the city that it has a 10 tefahim wall surrounding the entire city and has doors that close at night, a gate that closes at night. It's also called shituf. Halacha hayt. Okay. הלכה ח' אין מערבים בחסרות אלא בפת שלמה בלבד. אפילו כיכר מאפה שאה והיא פרוסה, אין מערבים בה. So, the Eruf Haserot is done specifically with a full loaf of bread, with a non-cut loaf of bread. Even a very large loaf of bread that is cut into many pieces cannot be used for Eruf. However, a very small loaf of bread that was very, very small, but it was full, meaning it was uncut, may be done Eruf with. In the same way, Eruf could be done with bread made out of wheat. Also, an Eruf could be done with bread that is made out of rice or millet or adashim or lentils. However, in the same way you could do it with pat tevu'ah, bread that is made from the 5 grains. You could also do it with bread made from rice or lentils. However, not with bread made from millet. V'shituf, and shituf, ben befat, ben bish'ar ochalim. So this Eruf, we were speaking about Eruvei Haserot. But shituf could be done with bread or other foods. בכל אוכל משתתפים חוץ מן המים בפני עצמן ומלח בפני עצמו. You could do shituf mevo'ot with any food except water alone or salt alone. וכן כמהין בפטריות אין משתתפים בהן שאינן חשובים כאוכלים. Also, types of mushrooms cannot be done eruvim with because they're not shituf mevo'ot with because they're not considered at the status of food. And if you mix salt and water together, it becomes muriyas, which is a type of some sort of a marinade for fish, and can be done shituf with because it has some intrinsic food attribute. Halachat. So we said for Eruf Haserot, for the Eruf of the Haser, it is enough to just one full loaf of bread. That is what is necessary to do to perform an Eruf Haserot. However, to perform an Eruf Shituf Mevo'ot, we said any type of food. Now, Harambam is going to specify the minimal amount of food necessary in order to do Shituf Mevo'ot. Halachat. How much is the minimum, the amount necessary to do shituf with? כגרוגרת לכל אחד ואחד מבני המבוי ומבני המדינה, והוא שיהיו 18 או פחות. אבל אם היו מרובין על זה, שיעורו שתי סעודות שהן כ18 גרוגרות. The minimum amount of food that you do shituf mevo'ot with is a gerogeret, which is about 1/3 of a volume of an egg. It's the size of a dried date, approximately. And for one gerogeret for each one of the residents of the tenants of the mavoy, or for each one of the tenants of the city. And this is on condition that it's 18 or less tenants around the mavoy or the city. However, if it's more than 18 tenants, then the minimum amount is the amount of 2 se'udot, 2 meals. And 2 meals is equal to about 18 gerogerot, which is about 6 besim benoniot. שהן כ6 besim benoniot, אפילו היו משתתפים אלפים ורבבות שתי סעודות לכולן. And even if the tenants of the city or the mavoy were thousands or tens of thousands, it is enough 2 se'udot for the whole city or the whole mavoy is sufficient to consider the Eruf, the shituf, a valid shituf, and to allow the people to carry in and out of from their own private areas of the city and into the city, and to allow people to carry from their own private areas of their mavoy and into the mavoy, or from the haserot of the mavoy, etc. Halacha yod. Kol ochel shehu ne'echal kemot shehu, keron pat, umine dagan, ubasar chai, im yishtatefu bo, she'oro mazon shete se'udot. Any food that is eaten as is, like bread or different types of grain or mizonot foods or uncooked meat, if they do shituf with it, if they want to use it for shituf, the minimum amount to use for it is the minimum amount that would be used for 2 meals, as specified in the previous halacha, 18 gerogerot. The chol shehu liftan, however, anything that is liftan, a dip, any food that is not a food in itself for a meal, but rather a food that you dip your bread in, or it's a dip of sorts, like the salsa, right? It's a dip. כגון יין מבושל ובשר סלי וחומס ומורייס וזיתים ואימהות של בשלים, like you know, cooked wine or basar sali or roasted meat or vinegar or murias or olives or onions. The shi'uro kede le'echol bo shete sa'udot, the amount to do shituf with dips, with foods that you dip your bread in and types like that, is the amount needed to be sufficient for 2 meals. So for example, if a cup of salsa is sufficient for a meal of bread, for an amount of 9 gerot full of bread, okay, then this would be the amount of salsa you use for the shituf, 1 cup, and etc. And on the line, along the lines of the way I just explained. Halakha Yod Aleph. Nishtatafu beyayin chai. If they did shituf with undiluted wine, shi'uro shete rebi'iyot lekulan. The amount of the minimum amount is 2 rebi'iyot, and we will see in a bit what rebi'it is. Rambam will define all the amounts in a later halakha. V'chen b'shechar. Also, in any other alcoholic beverage, shete rebi'iyot. The minimum amount is 2 rebi'iyot to do shituf with. Bisim, shetain, eggs, 2. ומשתתפين בהן ואפילו הן חיות, and they may be done shituf with even if they are uncooked. Rimonim, shetain, pomegranates, also 2. Etrog, ehad. In etrog, a citron, the minimum amount is 1, because it could be split into 2, and that is half an etrog is what's considered sufficient to provide for a meal, not for the dip of a meal. Hamisha egozim, the side dish of a meal. Hamisha egozim, hamisha afarsakim, 5 nuts and 5 peaches. And the peaches in Harambam days, I'm just using the word peach because in Hebrew today they use the word afarsek as peach, but it's talking about a different type of fruit, a smaller fruit. Litra yarak ben hay ben shaluk, any greens, the amount of a litra, and we will see a little bit later what all these amounts are. So any greens, whether they're cooked or completely uncooked. However, any greens that were half cooked, they are not allowed to be done eruv with or shituf with. Because in a way that is half cooked, it is not edible in any way. Ochla tebalin, half of a revi'it of wine, which is ochla is a volume of half of a revi'it. In other words, half of a revi'it, which is what we call, I would call it sheminit. So that is the amount of tablin, of spices. Kab temarim. Kab is another amount, and we will specify a little bit later exactly what a kab is, of dates, or kav gerot, a kab of dried figs. Maneh de bela is another amount which we will specify of dried figs. Kab, gerot are dried dates, and temarim are non-dried dates. De bela is dried figs. Kav tapuhin, or kav of apples. Apples, tapuhin in his days were something a little different than our tapuhin. And I will already come to define what a maneh is. We said maneh de bela, a maneh of dried figs. A maneh is 100 coins of dinar, which is approximately, in modern day terms, it's a volume, not a weight, but it's about 423 grams. Kav tapuhin, kav, we will see in a bit what a kav is exactly. Kishut, kimlo hayad. Kishut is called today kuskara. So kimlo hayad, the handful. Folin lachain. Folin are ful. I think it is also called ful in America, or it's a type of bean. So non-dried fulim, handful. Hazin is a wild weed that is similar to barley. Litra, the amount is a litra. Vatiradin and spinach. They are also part of greens and are done eruv with. Aleh besalim, leaves of onions, and me'arevin bahen, unless they grew and they become long. However, less than this is not food. And all these things are like side dishes. All these things that were mentioned, the guiding rule for this halakha is that all of these are side dishes, and they are the amount needed for a side dish for 2 meals. And that's why they gave these smaller amounts. hashituf. And anything along the lines of that, if it's a side dish, you need the amount of side dish for 2 meals. And if it's a regular real food that would be used as a main meal, the minimum, we need the amount is the minimum amount for 2 meals. And all these foods may be joined together for the shituf. Halakha yod bet. In this halakha, Rambam gives a specification of these measurements that were given previously. And there's a very helpful halakha for many things. It's a useful halakha for many places of the Mishne Tora. I will go through it. I will try to maybe give some of the modern day measurements. So yes, in any event, it's a very helpful halakha. So litra ha'amura bechol makom, the word litra said in any place, melo shete revi'iyot is the amount of 2 revi'iyot. And the revi'it is about the volume of 148 of 74 cubic centimeters, and therefore a litra is 148 cubic centimeters. Ve'uchla hasi revi'it, and an ukhla is half of a revi'it, which is 37 cubic centimeters. A revi'it is 74 cubic centimeters, so an ukhla, which is half of a revi'it, is 37 cubic centimeters. Also, by the way, a litra is 35 dinarim, which is a type of measurement. And dinarim is usually given as a weight. So 1 dinar is considered as about 4.23 grams. Therefore, 35 dinarim is 35 grams. And therefore, 35 dinarim is 148 grams. So a litra again is at 148 grams, 148 cubic centimeters. I'm going a little bit extra here because this is a very important halakha, and I hope it benefits anybody that wants to appreciate the benefits of learning this halakha. Okay, v'hadinar shesh ma'in. So a dinar is the weight of shesh ma'in. So a ma'ah is about 0.75 grams, making a dinar, as I said before, about 4.23 grams. Okay? V'hama'a mishkal 16 se'orot, and a ma'a is also the weight of 16 se'orot, 16 stalks of barley. Sela arba'a dinarim, and the weight of a sela is the weight of 4 dinarim, which is 16.92 grams. V'harebi'it, and the volume of a rebi'it is defined as the volume shemahazeket min hamayim min hayayin mishkal 17 dinarim v'chasi dinar, is the volume of water or wine that holds about the weight of 17.5 dinarim around, which is 74 grams or 74 cubic centimeters, because water, and an interesting point is that water, the weight of water and the volume of water is equal. So 100 cubic centimeters of water is considered 100 grams of water. So the volume ratio is the same. So every 1 cubic centimeter is 1 gram in water. נמסת הליטרה משקל 35 דינר והאוכלה משקל 9 דינרים פחות רביע, and it comes out of this that the litra is 35 dinarim and ochla is 9 dinarim minus a fourth, so 8 3/4 dinarim, which is 37 grams because 37 cubic centimeters. Okay. Halakha Yud Gimel continues on explaining the measurements. Se'ah ha'amura bechol makom sheshet kabin. Anywhere where it says se'ah, it's talking about sheshet kabin. A kav, ve'akav arba'at login, and a kav is 4 login. Okay, a log is 296 cubic centimeters. We'll see here. Ve'halog arba'a revi'iyot. So we said revi'it is 74 cubic centimeters. Therefore, a log is 296 cubic centimeters, and a kab, which is 4 login, is 1,184 cubic centimeters, and a se'ah, which is 6 kabin, is 7,104 cubic centimeters. וכבר ביארנו מידת רביעית ומשקלה, ואלו השיעורים שאדם צריך לזכור אותם תמיד, and these are measurements that any person needs to memorize always and know them by heart, and really knowing these ratios is extremely helpful for understanding many halachot in Harambam and in the Gemara and the Talmud. It's also just helpful to know where these measurements are and how to access them in their ratios. הלכה י"ד אוכל שהוא מותר באכילה, אף על פי שהוא אסור לזה המערב, הרי זה מערב בו ומשתתף בו. Any food that is permitted to eat is allowed to be eaten, even if it's not permitted. Yes. Right. So even if it's not permitted to be eaten by the person doing the eruv, he may do the eruv and shituf with it. Kesad, how? משתתף הנזיר ביין וישראל בתרומה. A nazir, somebody who made a commitment and a shevu'ah, he swore upon himself to not drink wine and some other things, not drink wine, not become tamemet, and not cut his hair. So he may do a shituf with wine, even though he himself is not allowed to drink wine. V'Yisrael b'truma, and also an Israelite who is not allowed to eat teruma. Teruma is food that is specifically allowed only for kohanim. An Israelite may do eruv on teruma. וכן הנודל מאוכל זה, או שנשבע שלא יאכלנו מערב בו ומשתתף בו. And also somebody who swears upon himself or does a neder that he won't eat a specific food, he may do eruv with this food, ומשתתף בו, and shituf, שאם אינו ראוי לזה, הרי הוא ראוי לאחר. Because even though it's not fit for the consumption of a certain person, it is fit for the consumption of some other people. So teruma, we said, is food that is fit only for kohanim. So an Israelite may do, for example, eruv with teruma because it is fit for the consumption of a kohen, and along the lines of that. However, davar ha'asur lakol, kiron tevel, something that is prohibited for eating by everybody, like tevel. Tevel is food that was not done terumatu ma'asrota, that was not taken. Fruits when they're picked in Eretz Yisrael, according to the Torah, they have to have a certain portion taken out of them and given to the Kohen and the Levi. The portion taken out is called teruma gedolah. And if this portion is not taken out, then the food is not allowed to be eaten, and it's punishable by karet. So davar asur le'echol lakol. Kiron tevel, afilu tevel shedivre sofim, even tevel of the law that was decreed by the sage, and this is any fruits that are grown out of Israel are considered tevel, not by scriptural law, but they still have to have some teruma done on them, if I'm not mistaken. V'chen ma'aser rishon shelo nitilat terumato kahogen, also ma'aser rishon, which is a tenth of the fruit that's taken out, which is not done properly. I'm explaining here very quickly because I want to get to the guiding rule for the halakha, which is very simple. And anybody who already knows a little bit about the terumot ma'asrot, this should be sufficient for them. So ma'aser rishon is about 10% of the fruits that you would take out, and if it wasn't done properly, it is not allowed for anyone. Also, there was another portion of the fruit called ma'aser sheni that would be taken out of the fruit, or hekdesh. Is a type of fruits that were specified to be given to Bet HaMikdash, and the person who specified them, or the Ma'aser Sheni, which is fruits that have to be mehila. Ma'aser Sheni is a portion of the fruits that has to be eaten in Yerushalayim. However, in some cases, the fruits would rot before getting to Yerushalayim, so the person was allowed to switch them for money and take the money to Yerushalayim and buy food with the money. Hekdesh is also fruits that a person specified for Bet HaMikdash. However, in a certain case in which, for example, the person lived far from Bet HaMikdash, the fruits would rot on the way, and therefore he was allowed to switch it for money. However, if the switching was not done in the proper manner, they are not allowed to be. You still may not do eruv with these fruits. You may not do eruv with the fruits because the switching of turning them into money was not done in a proper manner. Demai is fruits that we are not sure if Terumot Ma'asrot were done on them, and therefore they are not allowed to be eaten, but only from Derabanan, and Aniyim may eat them, and therefore they are edible by certain people, and that's why, and therefore they fall under the guiding rule of Halakha Yadal, which says that any food that is edible to certain people, even if it's not edible to the person doing the Eruv, it may be done Eruv with. ומעשר שני בהקדש שנפתו אף על פי שלא נתן את החומש, אין החומש מעכב. מעשר שני in הקדש, as I said, they need to be switched in a very specific manner. And part of the switching them into money, consists in it, entails giving a certain tax of about 25%. And if this tax was not given, it does not make the fruits not allowed to do Eruvin, and therefore you can do. ומערבים במעשר שני בירושלים מפני שהוא שם ראוי לאכילה, אבל לא בגבולים. And מעשר שני, which I said, is a portion of the fruits that has to be eaten in Yerushalayim. It may be done Eruvin in Yerushalayim, because in Yerushalayim it is allowed to be eaten. However, out of Yerushalayim it is not allowed to be eaten, and therefore it is not allowed to be done Eruv on. Kesad, one moment. Yes. Halakha Tetzain. Kesed me'arevin b'chaserot. So how are Eruvei Chaserot done? How is the Eruv put in place? How is the Eruv enacted? Gobin hala achat shelema mikol bait uvait, u'manachin hakol b'chli echad b'bait echad mibate hachaser. The tenants of the Haser take one bread, one loaf of bread from each, one full loaf of bread from each one of the resident of the tenants' houses, of the little of the tenants' houses. And it is all put in one canister of sorts, or one keli, one bowl, in one of the houses of the Haser. Even in the hay house, or some the place where they would have the cows, or bet osar, which is the storage house. So again, what do they do? Erev Shabbat, they all take the people, the person in charge of the Eruv takes one full loaf of bread from each one of the tenants of the Haser, and they put it in a specific house. However, אם נתנו בבית שער, אפילו בית שער של יחיד ובאכסדרה ובמרפסת ובבית שאין בו 4 אמות על 4 אמות, אינו עירוב. However, if they put the loaves of bread that were collected, if they put them in a beit sha'ar, and a beit sha'ar is a little pathway that leads up to the Haser, which is the entrance to the Haser. It's not the alleyway, it's not a mavoy, it's like kind of a little pathway that leads up to the Haser. It's considered part of the Haser. So if they put it there, or even if it's a beit sha'ar shel yachid, even if it's owned by one of the tenants, it's privately owned by one of the tenants of the Haser, or be'achsadra, or in an achsadra, which is a type of like an awning, or be'mirpeset, or in a porch, or be'vayt she'en bo 4 amot al 4 amot, in a place, little house, or room that does not have 4 by 4 amot, it's not considered an Eruv if you put the loaves of bread there. And when the Eruv is collected, מברך ברוך אתה השם אלוהינו מלך העולם אשר קידשנו במצוותיו וציוונו על מצוות עירוב, ואומר בעירוב זה יהיה מותר לכל בני החסר להוציא ולהכניס מבית לבית בשבת. And when they do the Eruv, when they put all the loaves of bread in the one specific spot, they say the following beracha that I just said, and the person in charge of the collection of the Eruv, or the person putting all the Eruv in one spot, says, with this Eruv, it will be permitted to all of the tenants of the Haser to take in and out from house to house on Shabbat. And a child under 13 years of age may be the collector of Eruvei Haserot, and the house which they put the Eruv in does not need to give a loaf of bread, because they're the house putting the bread in. Also, if it was a house that was regularly used to put the loaves of bread in, once it was put into regular use, they are not allowed to change it, so that not to make a fight these people that they were used to having the Eruv in their house, they would also used not to give a loaf of bread. And now if you change it to a different house, they're going to have to give a loaf of bread, and they might get annoyed, and might make a fight. For shalom, for peace between the tenants of the chaser, it was said that once one house is chosen, it is chosen and does not and cannot be changed. Halakha Yud Zayin. This halakha discusses how to do שיתופי מבואות. וחסד משתתפים במבוי. And how do we do שיתופי מבואות? גובה אוכל כגרוגרת מכל אחד ואחד, או פחות מכגרוגרת אם היו מרובים, ומניח הכל בכלי אחד בחסר מחסרות המבוי, או בבית מן הבתים, אפילו בן קטן או אכסדרה, אפילו בית קטן או אכסדרה או מרפסת, על זה שיתוף. אבל אם ינחו באוויר מבוי, אינו שיתוף. So how is the shituf mavoi enacted? How is it put into action? How do you do it? So they collect one gerogeret of food from each one of the tenants of the mavoi, and if we said if it's more than 18, it's just a portion. And they put everything after everything was all the food was collected, they put it in one canister or keli, one vessel, in one of the haserot leading up to this mavoi. In other words, the mavoi, I don't know if I explained this well enough, it would be like an alleyway which would have different haserot open into it. So you put it in one of the haserot that are open into the mavoi, or in one of the houses that were open into the mavoi, even if it was a small house or an achsadra, or in some small little place, or an awning, or a porch, which we said is not permitted for shi'iru, for shituf, nevertheless it is permitted. However, if the food collected was put in a place in the middle of nowhere in the mavoi itself, put on in the no specific place, it is not considered a shituf. Right. And if you put the keli in a haser, and presumably in the joint area of a haser, so he has to put it one tefach above the ground so that it is noticeable. ומברך על מצוות עירוב, and he says the same ברכה, ואומר, and he says, בזה השיתוף יהיה מותר לכל בני המבוי להוציא ולהכניס מחסרות למבוי בשבת, and he says, with this שיתוף, it will be permitted to all of the tenants of the mavoi to take in and out of the haserot into the mavoi on Shabbat. Halakha Yud Het. חלקו את העירוב ואת השיתוף. אף על פי שהוא בבית אחד אינו עירוב. אבל אם מילאו את הכלי מן העירוב ונשאר ממנו מעט בכלי אחר, מותר. So now we said, after collecting the food for the Eruvin, they have to put it in one vessel. So if they took the food, so in this halakha, we're saying, if they took the food and split it into two vessels or more, right? Even if it was in one house or one spot in a specific area, it is not considered an Eruvin. But this is on condition that the vessel they used wasn't overfilled. But if the vessel they used was so full that you needed to use another vessel to put the food in, it is permitted and it is considered a valid עירוב. הלכה י"ט. המשתתפים במבוי צריכים לערב בחצרות כדי שלא לשכח התינוקות תורת עירוב, שהרי אין התינוקות מכירים מה נעשה במבוי. When done, שיתוף מבוי is done, the tenants that did a שיתוף מבוי still have to do a shituf on their own haser. So for example, imagine you have 4 haserot opened to one alleyway, to one mavoi. So they do shituf mevoot in order to take in from the mavoi to the haser and from the haserot to the mavoi, from the 4 haserot into the mavoi and vice versa. But the tenants of the haserot have to do an iruv for each one of the haserot. So each one of the haserot has to do their own iruv. Why? Because the children and the young people, we're talking about children, they don't notice the shituf mevoot. And the whole point of shituf, and if we don't do iruv in the haser, they won't see ever that iruv is done. They won't see that there's some special action being done so that carrying will be allowed, and then they'll forget about it, and they won't know about iruv, and we said for the same problem, we brought in the above halakha, that people will forget about the public domain, private domain, and they'll take in and out and end up transgressing scriptural law. So therefore, the whole point is here, we want the children to notice that something special is being done in order to allow people to take out from their parts of this haser into the joint part and vice versa. And if we just rely on a shituf mevo'ot, this will be forgotten for the children living in the specific in the separate haserot. Lefichach, therefore, however, if in order to do the shituf mevaot, a loaf of bread was collected from each one of the tenants, then it is valid also to allow the tenants of the haserot to take in and out of their haserot and into the mavo, because this with bread, there's a special heker. It is noticeable when the bread is collected every Erev Shabbat to the children. So a group of people, of tenants in a haser that were sitting around the table eating, and the Erev Shabbat, and the day ended and it became night and Shabbat entered, they may rely on the bread that is on the bread to be considered their Eruv Haserot. Why? Because they're together, they're mixed in one with another, eating together, and therefore the Eruv Haserot, that they consider this bread to do the Eruv Haserot, the bread is valid for Eruv Haserot, and this is of course on condition, as we will see later, that it's all the tenants of a specific Haser. So imagine, for example, that you have 5 tenants in a Haser, and they're all eating around the table Erev Shabbat. And Shabbat comes in, or in other words, the day ends, and they have a loaf of bread on the table. So they may rely on this loaf to consider them me'orabin for Shabbat. And let's say there were many tenants in one haser, and they were even from a different mavoy. In other words, there was a mavoy, for example, that had, for example, 4 haserot, and all the tenants were in one haser around one table, and there was bread on the table, and the same thing happened that the day ended. They may rely on this bread to consider their mavoy valid as their shituf mavoy valid, to allow them to carry in and out of the mavoy on Shabbat. But this is again on condition that everybody was present, at least one representative from each residency within the mavoy. הלכה כ' לקח אחד מבני החצר פת אחת ואמר הרזה לכל בני החצר או אוכל כשתי סעודות ואמר הרזה לכל בני המבוי אינו צריך לגבות מכל אחד ואחד. If one of the residents of the haser, or one of the residents of the mavoy, decided to take upon himself, he took one piece of bread and he said this is on behalf of all of the residents of the haser, or he took amount of 2 meals of food, and he said, this is on behalf of all the residents of the mavoy, this is valid, and food does not need to be collected from the rest of the residents of the haser or the mavoy. Abal, sarich, right, ve'amar, okay, Abal sarich lizakot lahem bo al yedei needs to make it owned by the rest of the tenants of the mavoy of the haser by somebody else. In other words, you put somebody else in charge, moving the ownership from his piece of bread to all of the tenants collectively of the mavoy of the haser, and the person in charge would go to each person and let him know that this piece of bread for eruv, or this 2 meals of food, is collected on his behalf by this specific tenant. ויש לו לזכות להן על ידי בנו וביתו הגדולים ועל ידי עבדו העברי ועל ידי אשתו, אבל לא על ידי בנו וביתו הקטנים ולא על ידי עבדו ושפחתו הכנענים מפני שידן כידו. And he does this zikui that we said with his younger, we may do it with his children, whether a boy or girl, or with his Hebrew slave, or with his wife, but not with his, he may do it with his older children that are above 13, for a boy above 13, for a girl above 12, but he may not do it with his younger children under 12 for a girl and 13 for a boy, and not with his non-Jewish slaves, because their hand is like his hand, because anything they do is like him, because they are so to speak, under his domain of ownership. הלכה כ"א. וכן, also, יש לזכות להן על ידי שפחתו העברית, אף על פי שהיא קטנה, שהקטן זוכה לאחרים בדבר שהוא מדברי סופרים. Also, he may, with a shifha ivrit, with a Hebrew slave, female slave, even if she is young, under 12 years old, he may use her for the zikui because she's a slave, and it's derabanan. ואינו צריך להודיע לבני החסר ולבני המבוי שהרי זיקה להן ועירב עליהן שזכות היא להן וזקין לאדם שלא בפניו. And I made a mistake in explaining last halakha, so I'm going to re-explain. So this whole situation we were talking about of somebody who wants to be extra nice and give half of all of the tenants of the haser, what we said he needs to lezakot means that he needs to give it to somebody on behalf that takes it on behalf of all the tenants of the haser. One moment. Right. So how does he do this? So this extra a nice person that wants to, for example, he wants to give a loaf of bread on behalf of all the tenants of. Okay, I'll give an example. For example, a haser, a jointly owned private domain with 4 residents. Each one has his separate residency. One of the residents, I'll call him Shimon, decides he wants to give 1 loaf of bread on behalf of all the residents of the haser. So what does he do? He doesn't have to tell everybody that he's doing it. But what he does is he has to give the loaf of bread to somebody, and that somebody receives it, accepts that loaf of bread on behalf of him for the rest of the tenants, residents of the haser or mavoy. So, and this person could be his older children, or his Hebrew slave, or his wife, but not his younger children, and not his non-Jewish slave, because their hand is like his hand. However, a weird, so to speak, odd halakha is that with a female, one moment, right, with a slave, right, so with his female slave, even though she's younger than, and it would seem also a male slave, even if they're children, because they're slaves, and they're Hebrew slaves, he may do the zikui with them. ואינו צריך להודיע לבני החצר או לבני המבוי שהרי זיקה להן ועירב עליהן שזכות היא להן וזקין לאדם שלו בפניו. He doesn't need to tell the rest of the tenants of the haser, the rest of the residents of the haser, because you don't need to, when you give somebody something, you don't need to tell him to his face. You could give it, somebody could receive it on behalf of them, and that is enough. הלכה כ"ב. Or Kaf Aleph in some of the books. The Eruv and the Shituf that we spoke about on Shabbat could be done only from the daytime, from before Shabbat, from Erev Shabbat. Also, Ben HaShemashot, which is the time from sunset to when 3 medium stars come out. Also, an Eruv could be enacted in that time. Even though that time is considered we're not sure if it's day or night, it could be done because Eruvin is the Rabbanan, and the same way Hachamim permitted us to do an Eruv, because from scriptural law, really, this could be carried, and this Hachamim permitted us to do the Eruv in Ben HaShemashot, since it was their decree. ולעולם צריך שיהיה העירוב או השיתוף מסוי ואפשר לאכלו כל בין השמשות. And the rule is that the Eruv, the food taken for the Eruv or collected for the Eruv or for the Shituf has to be in reach to be eaten all of Ben HaShemashot. In other words, all of Ben HaShemashot, it needs to be in a place that it could be eaten. And if the Eruv was done in Ben HaShemashot, for example, 5 minutes before the end, the 3 stars come out, it has to be available for consumption that whole time. לפיכך, אם נפל עליו גל, או אבד או נשרף, או שהיה תלומה ונטמאת מבעוד יום, אינו עירוב, ושחשיכה הרי זה עירוב. Therefore, if something fell on the Eruv, or the Eruv got lost, or got burnt, or was teruma that got impure and then it becomes unedible to anybody, unfit for anybody's consumption, And all this happened bi'od yom, from before the evening. The eruv is not considered an eruv. It's an invalid eruv even though it was collected. If this happens at night, the eruv is considered valid because during Ben Hashemashot it was good. And if it was safek, they weren't sure if it happened at night or in the day, then it is kasher because safek eruv kasher. Also, if it happened Ben Hashemashot, seemingly, if the eruv was ruined Ben Hashemashot and you knew that at a certain point in Ben Hashemashot the eruv was in place, it would be mutar to rely on this eruv. So the guiding rule here is, for this halakha, that the eruv has to be in place at a certain point in Ben Hashemashot. If something happens to it Ben Hashemashot, seemingly from the halakha, it's not clear, but I'm pretty sure after looking at some areas, and if anybody disagrees with me on this, please, I implore you to let me know. So even if the eruv got ruined in Ben Hashemashot, because at a certain point in Ben Hashemashot the eruv was in place, it is considered a valid eruv. הלכה כף ב' או כף ג' נתן הערוב או השיתוף במגדל ונעל עליו ואבד המפתח קודם שחשיכה אם אי אפשר לו להוציא העירוב אלא אם כן עשה מלאכה בין השמשות הרי זה כמי שאבד ואינו עירוב שהרי אי אפשר לאכלו. Somebody who placed the עירוב, the food of the עירוב or the food of the שיתוף in a closet or some sort of a wooden structure and it got locked and the key was lost before the evening. Well, the rule is like this. If he was not able to access this food for the eruv, unless he did a melacha in Ben Hashemashot, in other words, if the only way to access the eruv was if he did a melacha in Ben Hashemashot to try to open the closet or find the key, this is considered as though the food of the eruv, or collected for the eruv of the shituf, was lost, and therefore it holds the eruv invalid. Somebody who did hafrashat terumot u'ma'asrot and made a condition that the terumot u'ma'asrot are only considered done from the night, and then in this type of situation, you may not do eruv with this fruit, even though really the terumot u'ma'asrot were taken out of these fruits, but because the condition was made that at the time of the terumot u'ma'asrot that they would only be considered valid from the time of night, then the eruv is invalid. Because these fruits are still unedible, unfit for anybody's consumption for all of Ben Hashemashot. And the rule is that the se'udah of the eruv, the food of the eruv, the food collected for the eruv of the shituf, is fit for some sort of human consumption and is in place, available for consumption from the daytime as well as some point in Ben Hashemashot. This concludes our chapter for today, and Be'ezrat Hashem we will be studying more tomorrow. Baruch Adonai le'olam, amen ve'amen.